It was supposed to be a secret, one hidden behind wealth, power, and reputation. But when a young man threatened to reveal the truth about his relationship with a millionaire, that secret turned deadly. Within days, one lover was found brutally murdered, and the other was at the center of a scandal no amount of money could bury. This is not just a story about greed. It is about betrayal, obsession, and a crime that shocked an entire community. Welcome to Dark Motives, where we uncover the hidden stories behind some of the most shocking crimes. In today's case, we look at the tragic murder of a young man whose relationship with a wealthy millionaire ended in betrayal and bloodshed. Before we dive deeper, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now, because here we tell the stories others are too afraid to touch, and you do not want to miss what comes next. Also, let us know in the comments where you are watching from. I love seeing how far this community reaches across the world. Now let's begin this chilling story of love, secrets, and a desperate fight to keep a reputation intact. Charles Whitmore was a man everyone in New York City seemed to know, yet very few truly understood. Born in Queens to a middle-class family, he grew up far from the glittering lights of Manhattan. His father worked long shifts as a mechanic, while his mother cleaned offices late into the night. Charles watched them struggle, and from a young age he promised himself he would never live the same way. Through sheer determination, he pushed his way through college, majoring in finance. By his late 20s, he was already climbing Wall Street, taking risks no one else dared to. Those risks paid off, and by the time he was 40, Charles had turned himself into one of the city's most successful investors. He purchased a sprawling estate in the Hamptons, filled it with art, luxury cars, and hosted parties that only the elite could attend. But despite the outward glamour, Charles carried a secret he could never share. His wealth gave him access to anything he wanted, yet he lived in constant fear that one truth about his personal life would destroy everything he had built. To the world, he was a ruthless businessman with a flawless reputation. But in the shadows of his mansion, Charles lived a different story, one that would eventually pull him into a dangerous affair with devastating consequences. The man who would change everything for Charles was Adrian Cole. Adrian grew up in Brooklyn, raised by a single mother who worked long hours just to keep their small home together. Life had been a struggle, but Adrian carried himself with a confidence that turned heads wherever he went. He had a way of making people feel noticed, and that charm often opened doors that would have otherwise remained shut. He worked at an upscale lounge in Manhattan, the kind of place where the wealthy gathered to drink, celebrate, and be seen. It was in that lounge that Adrian first crossed paths with Charles Whitmore. Charles was used to being admired from a distance, rarely approached directly, but Adrian was different. When their eyes met, Adrian did not look away. He smiled, spoke with ease, and treated Charles like a man rather than a symbol of wealth. That brief exchange grew into something more. What began as small conversations at the bar turned into secret dinners, long talks behind closed doors, and moments neither of them could risk being seen. For Adrian, this was a world unlike anything he had ever known. For Charles, it was both thrilling and terrifying, a hidden life that could undo everything if it ever came to light. What neither man realized was that secrecy has a way of breeding danger. And in their case, the secret they shared would become a ticking clock, counting down to betrayal and tragedy. For months, Charles and Adrian lived in two separate worlds. By day, Charles played the role of the successful businessman, entertaining clients, attending galas, and smiling for photographs that would appear in glossy magazines. By night, he disappeared into a private world where only Adrian existed. Behind the gates of his mansion, they shared dinners, laughter, and stolen moments that had to remain invisible to everyone else. But a relationship built on secrecy can never stay simple. Adrian wanted more. He was tired of hiding, tired of being a shadow in someone else's life. He wanted to travel openly, to hold hands without fear, to live a life where love was not a secret. Charles, however, could not risk it. His entire fortune, reputation, and carefully crafted image depended on silence. The tension between them grew. Adrian began to question how long he could remain invisible, while Charles grew increasingly anxious about how much Adrian knew. Their conversations, once filled with excitement, turned into arguments, each one sharper than the last. Still, neither could walk away. For Adrian, the allure of wealth and the hope of a future kept him close. For Charles, the fear of losing Adrian and the fear of exposure kept him trapped in a cycle he could not control. It was a fragile balance, one that could not hold forever. And soon, the very secret that bound them together would become the weapon that tore them apart. The turning point came when Adrian began to demand more. He had lived in the shadows long enough, and he was no longer satisfied with secrecy. He wanted recognition, a place in Charles's life that went beyond hidden rooms and quiet whispers. At first, Charles tried to buy time. He promised vacations, gifts, and even hinted at change, but none of it was enough. Adrian wanted the truth to be acknowledged, and when he realized Charles would never risk his empire, Adrian made a choice that would seal his fate. He began to threaten exposure. In private conversations, he hinted at telling the press, at reaching out to people who would be very interested in the secret life of one of New York's most powerful men. Charles brushed it off at first, believing Adrian's words were born out of frustration. But as the weeks passed, Adrian's tone hardened. His threats became more direct. The idea of losing everything he had built, the respect, the influence, the fortune, filled Charles with dread. For a man who had spent his entire life constructing a flawless image, the thought of scandal was worse than ruin. And so fear began to replace reason. In the quiet of his mansion, Charles started to believe that Adrian was no longer just a lover. He was a danger that had to be stopped. The night everything changed began like so many others. Adrian arrived at the mansion expecting another tense conversation, but this time his patience had run out. He no longer spoke in hints or suggestions. He told Charles directly that if he would not acknowledge their relationship, he would reveal it himself. For Charles, those words were like a blade pressed against his throat. He could see his fortune crumbling, his face on the front page of every newspaper, his empire reduced to ashes. Panic and pride mixed together until logic disappeared. The argument escalated. Voices rose, doors slammed, and the polished walls of the mansion echoed with words filled with anger and fear. Adrian insisted he deserved more, that he would no longer live hidden. Charles insisted that silence was the only way to survive. Neither man was willing to bend, and in that collision of demands, the bond that once connected them snapped. In that moment, Charles stopped seeing Adrian as a partner. He saw him as a threat that could destroy everything he had sacrificed for. And as the argument reached its peak, a dangerous thought began to take hold in Charles's mind, a thought that would soon turn into an irreversible action. The argument carried into the early hours, neither man backing down. Adrian's voice grew sharper, his threats more direct. Charles paced the room, his mind racing with images of headlines, whispers at boardroom tables, and the slow collapse of everything he had built. Fear gripped him harder than it ever had before. Then, in one instant, fear turned into rage. Adrian repeated the threat, promising that the world would soon know the truth. Something inside Charles snapped. He lunged forward, not with reason, not with restraint, but with a violent impulse born out of desperation. The struggle was quick, but brutal. Adrian tried to fight back, but Charles's panic gave him strength he did not know he had. When it was over, the silence in the room was deafening. Adrian lay still, the life gone from him, while Charles stood frozen, staring at what he had done. For years, Charles had controlled every aspect of his life. Every deal, every word, every public appearance was carefully measured, but in those few minutes, all control was lost. The secret he had fought so hard to protect was now tied to something far darker than scandal. It was tied to blood. Charles stood frozen, his heart pounding so violently he could hear it echo in his ears. For a moment, he could not move, could not think. The weight of what he had done pressed down on him, heavier than any burden he had ever carried. But then survival instincts kicked in. If anyone found out, everything was over. He could not let that happen. He moved quickly, almost frantically, dragging Adrian's body across the polished floor. Every sound in the mansion seemed louder than usual. The creak of the floorboards, the scrape of shoes, even the ticking of the clock on the wall. He felt as if the whole world could hear what he was doing. But still, he pressed on. He had to erase every trace. Charles gathered cleaning supplies, wiping surfaces, scrubbing the places where the struggle had spilled over. He picked up broken items, rearranged furniture, and worked as though he could rewrite the events of the night with enough effort. But no matter how hard he tried, one thing was clear. He could not erase the reality of what had happened. He could only hide it. In a desperate attempt to contain the damage, he moved Adrian's body to his car. The mansion's gates opened slowly, and Charles drove into the darkness of the night, his mind racing. Every pair of headlights that passed him felt like a spotlight. Every car that slowed down felt like it knew. Still, he kept driving, searching for a place where he could make the body vanish, where the truth would never surface. When he finally stopped, the silence of the night was overwhelming. He left Adrian there, far from the mansion, far from the life they had shared. As he drove back, he told himself it was over, that no one would connect him to what had happened. But deep down, he knew the truth. Secrets have a way of surfacing, and this one would come back to haunt him in ways he could never control. It did not take long for Adrian's disappearance to raise suspicion. Friends noticed when he stopped answering calls, when he failed to show up at the lounge where he worked, and when his usually active presence went completely silent. Within days, his mother reported him missing, and the case quickly drew attention. Investigators began retracing Adrian's steps, combing through phone records, messages, and surveillance footage. That trail led them straight to the wealthy circles he had recently stepped into, and eventually to Charles Whitmore. At first, Charles played his role flawlessly. He spoke calmly, acted surprised, and denied knowing anything about Adrian's whereabouts. But detectives are trained to look past appearances, and something about Charles's composure felt rehearsed. The breakthrough came when investigators uncovered messages between Charles and Adrian. Hidden in phones and laptops were exchanges that revealed the depth of their connection, the secrecy, and finally, the arguments that had escalated before Adrian's disappearance. Suddenly, Charles was no longer just a respected businessman. He was the last person seen with Adrian alive. Search teams expanded their efforts, following leads that eventually brought them to a remote area outside the city. There, in a place Charles thought no one would ever look, they made a grim discovery. Adrian's body, hidden away in the shadows of the night, was found. The evidence of violence was clear, and the connection to Charles was undeniable. News of the discovery spread like wildfire. Headlines splashed across newspapers, whispers spread through boardrooms, and the carefully polished image of Charles Whitmore shattered overnight. The man who had once seemed untouchable was now at the center of a case that mixed wealth, secrecy, and murder. And for the first time in his life, Charles faced a truth he could not control. Charles Whitmore was arrested and charged, his wealth and reputation unable to shield him from the evidence stacked against him. In the courtroom, the story of his secret life unfolded piece by piece, shocking those who once admired him. Prosecutors painted the picture of a man so desperate to protect his image that he chose murder over truth. The jury saw through the defense, and Charles was sentenced, his empire crumbling as he was led away in handcuffs. The story left behind more than headlines. It raised questions about power, secrecy, and the lengths some will go to in order to protect what they fear losing most. Adrian's life, full of promise, was cut short in the shadows of another man's fear. And Charles, once a symbol of success, became a cautionary tale of how quickly everything can unravel when truth is buried. Even now, people debate what truly happened inside that mansion. Was it premeditated, or was it a moment of blind rage? Did Charles ever regret his actions, or was he only haunted by the fact that he was caught? These questions remain, lingering like an echo long after the trial ended. What is certain is that 2 lives were destroyed the night secrets turned to violence, and the story serves as a chilling reminder that no amount of money, power, or influence can silence the truth forever. Thank you for watching this case on Dark Motives. Share your thoughts about this story in the comments below. Do you believe Charles acted out of fear, or was it something deeper? I want to hear your perspective. And if you are new here, make sure you subscribe so you never miss the cases we uncover. Until next time, stay safe, and remember, the darkest motives often hide in plain sight.